Yo, what's going on? It is your boy King Tynex here, back with another video. You guys already know the deal. I will leave the link to Neptune's Wattpad in the description, since it did help with the story. And yeah, let's just get into the video. Now, in the last part, we basically ended off with Izuku taking down both Todoroki and Ida. Now, when it came on to many of the students here, they would have looked at Izuku in amazement at the fact that this kid just came out of nowhere, being able to defeat both Ida and the number 2 hero's son. They thought that the number 2 hero's son, Todoroki, they would have obviously had a better chance against Izuku, but they were wrong. They honestly thought that Todoroki would have had the edge in this fight, but it was pretty much the exact opposite, where Todoroki, he didn't even stand a chance against Izuku, and in many people's opinion, that was insane. He didn't even use the weapon Momo gave him or anything, which was another talking point as well. But many people, they were just more so focused on Izuku's abilities, his quote-unquote quirk. Many people were just trying to figure out what exactly is this quirk. Many people figure that it may just be a telekinesis quirk, but others, they had a feeling that there was a bit more to it than just regular old telekinesis. If it was telekinesis, well, it would make sense, but it just seemed to be so strong, especially for somebody that came from a pretty average family overall. They didn't really hear much about Izuku in regards to being part of any special family or anything. At least when it came on to Todoroki, they had the excuse of knowing that he was the number 2 hero's son, which meant that he would probably have a lot of attack power. He would probably have a very strong quirk if he was the son of the number 2 hero. That was many people's theories at the very least. They weren't wrong, but it wasn't the exact case. Todoroki, nobody really knew the true history behind Shoto Todoroki, but I'm getting too ahead of myself. But Izuku, he would have just looked at the 2 people he defeated, and he would mention how they were pretty weak. He wished that they could do better though. He wouldn't just walk off though right after saying that he wished that they could do better, mainly because of the fact that he wanted to use this lightsaber, or this at least experimental lightsaber. He wanted to figure out just what he could really do with this lightsaber, just how much it held up to the original that he would usually wield in his old life. But he supposed that he would just have to wait for somebody that was worthy enough to use it. But now he was just going to use the force in order to just crush his opponents. When it came on to the elections though, the very next day, many people, they would just vote for Izuku off of pure strength. Shota Aizawa, well, he was the one to even mention people going to choose their class rep in the very first place, choose their class president. He honestly didn't care how they went about it. Yeah, so long as they got done by the very end, that's really all that mattered to Aizawa. Right after he would go to sleep in his sleeping bag, of course. Many people, they would end up voting for Izuku, but a couple of people, they would end up voting for somebody like Momo or Ida, mainly due to the fact that Momo, she seems to be a rather intelligent character, and Ida, he was the one to even mention doing it in a more orderly fashion than they were trying to in the beginning, where it was literally just everybody shouting out that they wanted to be the class president. Ida was the one to basically set everybody straight, mentioning how they should just do an election in order to figure out who would be the best running candidate. Not candidate, but the best class president. Even though nobody really knew each other all that well as of yet. Ida's rebuttal to this argument, you could say, was, well, since they don't know each other all that well yet, that takes away most bias, and where they would just be completely unfiltered. They would just vote for anybody that they felt was probably going to be the best at leading, and therefore that's why they ended up going for Izuku. They figured that if they had somebody strong as their class president, then that would probably say something about Class 1A as well. That Class 1A was strong as well. That's basically what their mindset was. Get somebody that's strong so that they can be a strong leader. With a strong leader, that means that you look good in front of others. It's basically like this. You are the president of Japan, or like prime minister, or whichever. You want to be strong for your people. You want to be strong. You do not want to wither at all. You want to show that you are strong and capable at all times. And that's probably why, like, some people are more hesitant about letting older people run for office as well nowadays, when you really think about it. Having a more youthful and strong but experienced leader would be more preferable in many people's eyes, or at least in my opinion. That's basically how I went for Class 1A as well. And of course they would go for Izuku for these very reasons. Izuku, he wouldn't be all that surprised that they voted him into office, and he would accept it with pretty graceful arms. He would go on to explain that he would lead this class into victory. He was going to be the one to lead everybody into victory. He was going to make sure that Class 1A shined among the rest of their peers. He was going to make sure that Class 1A stood at the very top. They weren't going to just be taken out to the limelight or whichever. They were going to show just how great they were, and everybody, they would get all riled up hearing this. It felt really motivational for a minute. But Aizawa, he would just cut everybody off by mentioning the fact that they were too loud. Izuku would just sigh hearing this. He didn't even really bother to try and say anything to Aizawa in response. He would just take it, because he knew that Aizawa kind of had a point here. He didn't really like taking orders from people, but at the same time, it's much more loose than when he was with Obi-Wan. He was taking orders from his sensei, sure, but the way that his sensei ran the class, it was pretty loose, so he didn't really mind all that much. He still felt pretty free overall. During lunch, he would even be talking to some of the girls and like one or two of the guys in this class as well, mainly because of the fact that they were just interested in his quirk and his upbringing as well. But while talking to them and explaining his quirk, sirens would suddenly alarm. Sirens would suddenly go off, and next thing you know, many people, they would immediately start rushing out of the facility. This was because of the fact that they mentioned that there was a security breach going on. It was like a level 3 security breach, where many of the upperclassmen, they mentioned that this had never happened before to UA during their time there, of course. Now, for there to be some sort of security breach, that must obviously mean that there are some super villains that managed to break into UA, which in that case, they needed to get out of here fast. Izuku, he would have been annoyed though, seeing all of these panicking people, and he would shut it down immediately by using his force in order to push everybody down to the ground. It felt as if like a wave of pressure was just hitting everybody in there. They would be confused, wondering where this came from and if it was a villain as well, but No, it would have actually been Izuku. He would have been hovering above the ground, just looking down on everybody. He would mention the fact that he was pretty disappointed in many of them. For those who were hero students especially, actually. Those who are hero students, especially upperclassmen, who have been trained to handle these sort of situations, then that's just a shame. What has you been teaching them if they were to just run away from a fight? Run away from a villain attack? They were hero students after all, and they were being trained in order to deal with these sort of situations, so why run away? This would have been a perfect time, a perfect opportunity to put your practice to the test. Actually go ahead and try to defeat these villains and show that UA is something that's not something to be toyed with. Show that UA is a very capable high school, but no, they blew it. And the funniest thing about it is, these weren't even real villains. Izuku would have looked out the window and he would facepalm seeing that there were just a bunch of reporters out there. He would call everybody out, mentioning the fact that there were just reporters outside that managed to break in, mainly because of the fact that they were just trying to get an interview with All Might. But the fact that these kids, they wanted to run away from some news reporters, run away from them in fear for some reason. What does that really say about them then? Sure, they may have thought they were villains, but even then, you can't even use that as an excuse. You were literally trained from year 1 to handle villains, and yet you run away from a fight. Izuku was honestly very ashamed of them. He didn't want to know what they would be like whenever they became full-fledged heroes. They would probably be some D-rank heroes sidekick at the very best if they were going to run away from all their fights. Izuku would have continued to badmouth most of the students until Bakugo was the one to say that, hey, I think we're good here. Izuku would have sighed and he would have left the room as well as the rest of Class 1A. They would have just headed back to their homeroom, in which many of the students, they would be commenting on what Izuku had said. Although they wanted to really disagree with Izuku here, he did really bring up a bunch of valid points. Like, yeah, why were the upperclassmen running? At the very least, when it came on to the freshmen, when it came on to the first years, they had the excuses saying that they never really dealt with practicing how to deal with villains before. They were in their first year and they haven't gotten all that much experience as of yet. But when it came on to the upperclassmen though, that was another story in which they definitely did have some form of training. But it was whatever. They just needed to show that they were going to be better than what this generation was going to give them. This generation of heroes being the second to third years at UA. After that whole fiasco at the cafeteria, Class 1A would be reflecting on everything Izuku was saying, but they wouldn't have much time to dwell on it for long, because of the fact that they would end up having to actually deal with another thing, this being, well, the fact that they were going to go off campus the very next day in order to do some sort of rescue training, or at least that's what they thought they were going to be doing at the very least. They were kind of confused at first, considering how big UA was. That they didn't have some sort of rescue facility was pretty surprising to many of the individuals within Class 1A, but at the same time, the fact that they had outside facilities, that was really making them question where exactly UA's budget was coming from. Like, how big was it as well? it seemed that they were able to afford giant robots, and now they're able to afford to have facilities that are outside of the school grounds. That was kind of crazy in their opinion, the fact that UA just seemingly had that much money. But while they were on the bus ride to the USJ, many other students were decided to take this opportunity to start talking more about each other and their quirks, just how cool some of them were, like Izuku's and Todoroki's, while others who had personality issues such as Bakugo, people would be commenting on how it was pretty terrible, that he probably would never become a proper hero if he were to keep up this same sort of personality, even if it was more calm than in canon. Many people wouldn't even know about this until Izuku basically was the one to step up for Bakugo in this situation, mentioning how Bakugo had actually simmered down throughout the years. Izuku made sure of it in all honesty, and many of the students would be rather surprised hearing this. The fact that Izuku managed to tame this wild beast that was Bakugo was impressive in their opinions, but if this was a tamed Bakugo, yeah, they didn't want to experience having to deal with an untamed Bakugo. They didn't want to see what Bakugo would have been like without a leash constantly around his neck. That leash, of course, being Izuku. Many of them, they didn't want to deal with Bakugo, but what they were wanting to deal with though is figuring out what exactly was Izuku's quirk. Many people would have just assumed at this point that he just had a very strong telekinesis quirk, but some had a feeling that there was a bit more to it. Maybe it was something like, I don't know, air manipulation. Some people were really grasping at straws. Many people coming up with all of these different theories as to what Izuku's quirk was, considering how strong it was, and what sort of training did he take in order to get his quirk to be as strong as it was. But Izuku would comment on how pretty much everybody and their guesses were completely wrong, very far off from the truth, and that there was actually more to his abilities than what he had been showing them so far. This would surprise even more of Class 1A. Now they wanted to know more about Izuku's quirk than ever before. Just how powerful was Izuku, and if he was holding back against Todoroki, then they were really curious to find out what no restraints on Izuku would look like, and Izuku that went all out. That was going to be something that many of Class 1A actually wanted to see one of these days. They will get a little bit of that opportunity when they actually reach the USJ, in which it would be pretty typical, of course, for a world full of people with superpowers. It would have started simply with Space Hero 13 introducing themselves to Class 1A and mentioning the different factors to using their quirks, just how dangerous a quirk could be, but also the potential for it to be very useful as well in rescue situations. Knowing how dangerous a quirk could be would probably be number one in learning how to control your quirk. Having an understanding for the potential horrific actions you could do with such a power was very important to know, so that they would be able to understand what restraint was like. Many people would automatically look over to Bakugo when 13 mentioned the word restraint, which Bakugo would get aggravated, and he would actually start to yell at many of the other kids, mentioning how he was calm. He could actually restrain himself. He's not some sort of berserker or whatever. But Izuku, he would just stay silent. He would just be kind of amused seeing how Bakugo was struggling to face the crowd of people that were swarming around him, basically ridiculing him at the same time. Their attention would no longer be on Bakugo though, as soon as Kirishima turned around and noticed a strange portal opening up. He would immediately call out about it and mention how there were villains coming out of it as well, and coming out of this strange portal. At first he thought that they were just some sort of fake villain actions that UA was trying to do, and thinking that these guys were actors or whichever you would like to take. But Aizawa, he would look over to Kirishima's direction and immediately realize that no, these were not even close to being fake villains. No. These guys were the real deal. No. Aizawa would immediately tell everybody to get back while he handled the situation, but Izuku, he wasn't that great of a listener at this point. Izuku would have cracked his fingers, and he was thinking of maybe using a lightsaber for this fight. But Aizawa would tell Izuku as well to stay behind. Izuku would pout, but he would reluctantly listen to Aizawa. He wanted to see what this old man could do. After all, he was a hero, and he was an underground hero at that. He had to have some skills in order for him to be Eraserhead. He had an erasure quirk. He could erase a person's quirk for a certain amount of time. That certain amount of time depending on when he blinked. As soon as Aizawa blinked, well, a person's quirk would reappear. But that's probably why he would usually have his goggles on while fighting people. This was something that Izuku would actually see firsthand for the very first time. He would see just how swift Aizawa was when it came on to dealing with the villains. And although he was just erasing their quirks, not necessarily having any form of other backup, he didn't have another sort of quirk or anything that enhanced their strength, he would see that Aizawa, he was still willing to go on at it. He was willing to fight all of these different villains, and he was able to take them down simply by erasing their quirks and putting them on a more level playing field. Izuku liked this. He found this to be rather interesting. He never thought that his teacher was like that. He figured that, well, maybe, just maybe, this guy would be worth his time after all. At first, he just saw Aizawa as some lazy bum of a teacher, but no. Aizawa, he actually was able to do the walk as well. He was able to do the talk, and he could walk. That was amazing. That was pretty amazing in Izuku's book, because of the fact that he had known so many people throughout his life that could talk the talk, but they could never walk the walk. And, well, Izuku seeing this for the first time is obviously impressed. He would watch as Aizawa took down many of the villains, but one would end up stopping Aizawa in his streak of taking down villains. This one villain had an exposed brain. They also had a beak. They had crazed eyes. Not even really crazed, more so blank, to be honest. They just had a weird smile on their face, and the way they looked in general, it was just weird. It was unusual. It was odd. Incredibly odd. It was giving a pretty eerie feeling. Izuku would have a bad feeling about this monster that just took down his teacher in one go. Literally, all the monster or villain, all he really needed to do was grab Aizawa's head, grab the back of Aizawa's head, and then slam him into the pavement. That's all. That's all this guy had to do to basically take Aizawa out of the match for good. This was pretty surprising, and many people not in UA, but in Class 1A, they would immediately begin to become more fearful of the situation. At first, they had a confidence boost, seeing that the teacher was able to deal with so many of these villains, but as soon as this one villain with the exposed brain was able to knock out Aizawa, or at least seemingly knock him out, this vigor would immediately disappear from many people in Class 1A. Many of them, they did not have any experience fighting villains before, and of course they didn't want to end up having to deal with this villain either. One person would step up though. This person, of course, being Izuku. He would step up to the plate and notice that the villain, or whatever this monster was, they were constantly bashing Aizawa's head into the floor. Izuku had enough at this point. He would immediately use the force in order to take control of the Nomu's arm. The Nomu would try to move their arm in order to bash their teacher's head into the floor once more, but for some reason it wasn't moving. It was as if some new entity had taken over it. It was as if their arm was no longer theirs. Shigaraki would be confused and give an order to the Nomu to continue bashing the teacher's head into the floor, or even go ahead and crush it. But the Nomu, no matter how much they tried, they couldn't for some reason. Shigaraki would be confused, and he would try and figure out what was happening. They would try and walk over to the Nomu, only to see that the Nomu would let go of Aizawa. Shigaraki would yell at the Nomu, and telling them what are they doing. They would ask them, what exactly are they doing? Why are they letting go of Eraserhead? They would demand for the Nomu to pick them back up and to just crush them in their arms, but no, the Nomu was seemingly being disobedient, or at least that's what Shigaraki at first thought. When Shigaraki actually approached the Nomu, Izuku would use this opportunity in order to smack Shigaraki away. Shigaraki would be at a complete loss for words. What was happening now? Was the Nomu really rebelling? How was this possible? But no, that was not the case at all. And in actuality, Izuku would use this moment in order to lift the Nomu up as well. The Nomu would be lifted up into the sky, while Shigaraki would just be left to watch the situation. He would see the Nomu being torn apart at this point, and Shigaraki would be confused, so confused now. He was thinking that there was some sort of telekinesis quirk or whichever in this facility, and it was seemingly belonging to a pro hero if they were able to do this. And if so, which pro hero was there among this crowd of students? How were they able to blend in so well with the rest? They had looked through the files after all, and All Might was supposed to be here, not whoever else is in his place right now. It was supposed to be Aizawa, the Hero 13, and All Might at this USJ, but for some reason All Might wasn't there, and this new entity was here in their place. Shigaraki was trying to muster the words to say what was going on, but he would just be forced back down to the ground as soon as he tried to stand back up. He was lost, and he was just so confused right now. Everything wasn't going according to plan whatsoever. Shigaraki would just continue to watch as this Nomu, his precious prize, or whatever you would consider the Nomu to be at this point, being crushed by this hero. At least he thought it was a hero, over and over again. No matter how many times they would regenerate, they would constantly be torn apart right after. Eventually, Izuku would actually get sick of seeing this Nomu coming back to life, or, well, regenerating each and every time. And he would just decide to electrocute it right then and there using Force Lightning. Shigaraki would immediately be able to point the lightning over to one student, and many other people within Class 1A would actually be shocked to see that Izuku had lightning powers as well. This was new. This was odd to many of the people within Class 1A. Even Bakugo was a bit confused since he never really saw Izuku use his Force Lightning before, and this was probably what also was going to be pushing Bakugo back a couple of levels. Just when he thought he was getting closer to Izuku in terms of strength, Izuku went ahead and revealed this new ability, and this would literally just shatter Bakugo's perception of the world even more than it already was. Bakugo wasn't the best, okay, he could live with that, but seeing that even when he tried as hard as he could in order to keep at least somewhat with Izuku, only to find that it was completely pointless from the very beginning, since this guy already had more than just one ability on hand, on standby. That was ridiculous in Bakugo's opinion. Just how was this even able to... Just how was Bakugo supposed to compete at this point? That's what Bakugo was trying to figure out. Bakugo, he wouldn't say any of those words, so he wouldn't even bother saying anything as he watched Izuku just take down Nomu as if it was a piece of cake. Shigaraki would immediately try and jolt towards Izuku, wanting to kill this brat immediately, since they basically cheated in his opinion. They weren't supposed to kill the Nomu. No, the Nomu was supposed to kill all of these children, and then when All Might came, seeing all of these dead children, the guilt was supposed to weigh on him, and then the Nomu was supposed to go and fight All Might as well, at least taking him down, at least injuring this man to a point where he would have to retire. It would be even better if the Nomu actually killed All Might, but a win would have been a win in Shigaraki's opinion. If he could influence society to the point where it's like, oh, All Might, he retired? He actually lost in a fight? Or something along those lines? That would have just bolstered Shigaraki's ego to Jupiter, but no. They just had to ruin everything for Shigaraki, and he was angry, but Izuku, he would have immediately knocked him out unconscious. He would have also used this moment in order to set up a telepathic link between himself and Shigaraki, in which Izuku would be able to peer into his memories and find out some pretty interesting information. He decided to wait for the heroes to arrive, and take up all of these villains, arrest them, and bring them to, well, prison, where they belonged. And Izuku, he would use this opportunity afterwards in order to write an anonymous tip to the police officers. The police officers would bring this to the heroes as well, and All Might especially would be interested in what the contents of this information had to say, what this tip had to say. From this tip alone, they were able to actually get a warrant in order to, well, find the coordinations, but to look throughout the city. Basically, what they were able to manage to do was find All For One's hideout. And then All Might would actually bust through the walls. He would be able to find the one that was known as All For One, and he will go on to battle the man. Although All Might would be forced to retire after the fight, he was still able to catch All For One off guard. That was the whole thing about it. All For One would have been confused throughout the whole situation because of the fact that this wasn't going according to plan whatsoever. The plan was for Tomura Shigaraki, to use a Nomu in order to kill All Might, and even if he didn't kill All Might, he would have used this as a learning experience, having Kurogiri wipe the two of them away or something along those lines. But no, apparently Shigaraki got arrested on their very first mission, It was surprising to all for one, to say the very least, and now what's happening is that this wasn't even going to be the least of his problems anymore. No, as a matter of fact, these guys from UA, they managed to find his hideout so early on. He was so unprepared that it was ridiculous. Sure, he may have tried to fight All Might, but in the end, All Might was just too strong for him. All Might hadn't even given up his quirk to anybody as of yet either, but at this point as well, All Might was still suffering from his time limit. All Might would be able to defeat All for One, and his next issue was trying to find a successor while also being retired. Well, actually, being retired and looking for a successor, it was probably easier for All Might. But at the same time, he still wanted to go out there and save some civilians. It was just his heroic nature, overall speaking, and it pained him every day, him having to wait and find a successor while also being in his skinny form most of the time now as well. He wasn't sure about his time limit anymore. He had a feeling that if he were to just constantly be using his muscle form, that time limit it will just continue to trickle down to the point where he wouldn't even be able to buff up anymore, and one for all it would have just basically disappeared as well. He didn't want to risk that whatsoever. And also another thing, while the whole issue of fighting All for One was happening, Class 1A would actually be having this sports festival. Yeah, it was a pretty bizarre time, but Nezu would explain to many of the kids of the UA faculty, basically the UA school population. He would explain it as simple as this. After that whole fiasco at the USJ, the media was kind of going at it for UA, mentioning how they are putting their students in danger or whatnot. And with the upcoming sports festival, it was basically meant to show that, hey, UA is still a very capable school. UA is not to be made a fool. UA is superior. UA is basically a prestigious school that only the best of the best get into. And this whole thing with the villains, that was handled pretty easily in the end as well. Barely anybody got hurt throughout that situation. The only people that actually got hurt was, of course, Aizawa. 13, they didn't even have to go through anything here either. That was the most insane part about it. The fact that only one hero actually got injured would be a lot less fire than the media could use for the whole issue of villains attacking the USJ. It only showed that, hey, that these heroes are still human at the end of the day as well. And when looking at who actually got injured, it would have made sense in many people's opinions. It was the guy who could erase quirks, but he basically fought quirkless as well. Aizawa, Eraserhead. Many people, they would have not turned a blind eye necessarily, but they would have still believed that UA was still more capable of handling these sort of situations, considering the fact that 1A was also able to go through this with barely any scratches on them. Already said that, hey, maybe, just maybe, UA is really like that. Maybe UA is teaching each generation something more and more each time around. But they weren't completely sure. That was what the whole sports festival was meant for. And even in this sports festival, it would have been very easy for Izuku to pass all other rounds. Simply put, when it came on to the obstacle course, Izuku would just destroy most of the robots that got in his way. He would hover over the pillars that were basically making up that second part of the exam, where if they would have actually dropped from one of the pillars or the rope, simply put, they would be disqualified from the rest of the UA Sports Festival. Azuka would have had zero issues with this because of the fact that he could essentially fly in a way, and even if he couldn't necessarily completely fly, he would have also kept a piece of one of the robots with him as well, just in case. He didn't know when this could come in handy, but it was probably going to be a keepsake. Turns out this would have actually been really useful for the third part, mainly because of the fact that Azuku would just fly right over them using the piece of robot as a sled of sorts. And you wouldn't even bother trying to actually disarm the bombs or anything. No, these mines were meant to be a challenge, and who was he to ruin somebody else's fun? Who was he to ruin somebody else's challenge, something that would make them grow and mature as time went by? Constantly remembering the fact that they could have done something in order to make that challenge a bit easier. Azuka wasn't going to ruin such an opportunity for so many people. He got first place after all, and that would just be him acting like a spoiled brat, really. The second part to the sports festival would of course been the cavalry battle, in which Azuku would also have zero issue with because of the fact that nobody would be able to touch his team at all. And for the final part of the exams would be the sports festival, I mean. When it came on to the last part of the sports festival, basically what would have just ended up happening is that Azuku would immediately take down Shinso before he even got a chance to ridicule Aojiro for the fact that he decided to, simply put, leave the rest of the sports festival. He decided to step down from participating in the rest of the sports festival, and he would have actually warned Azuku about the potential abilities that Shinso had when they were in the hallways. And he noticed that Azuku was about to actually communicate with Shinso. Of course, Azuku would keep this in mind when fighting Shinso. That was why he made sure to stop him before he even opened his mouth, since he had a feeling that he would get riled up very easily from what this kid could say. And the next thing Azuku would deal with is Todoroki, in which Azuku would pretty much just toy with the boy until he mustered up his flames. Azuku would have mentioned the fact that, hey, these are your flames, not your father's own, not your mother's own. It's nobody else's but your own. So why are you basically holding yourself back from possibly winning? Azuku, before even Todoroki could mention the fact that Azuku's been holding back as well, Azuku had mentioned that his situation was different, and where he wasn't holding back for some petty reason like, oh, my father has a fire quirk and I don't like my father, so I ought to not use my flames at any point. No, Azuku's reason for why he didn't use his Force Lightning was because of the fact that he didn't have to. He would already win if he just used the regular old Force to push people back. That would have been content enough for most situations. Todoroki would just be riled up every time Azuku would continue to mention the difference between himself and, well, Todoroki. In the end, that's what would really force Todoroki to use his flames, and of course he would try to blast Izuku with it, only for Izuku to simply put not even be affected by Todoroki's flames. Rather, he would just use the force in order to extinguish it, and then go on to move and shoot force lightning at Todoroki through the icebergs that were surrounding the arena. This would immediately shock Todoroki, and he would be on the ground, paralyzed. Ectoplasm would be forced to escort Todoroki out to the room. Izuku's next match would be against Ida, in which Izuku would simply put, once again, use his force in order to push him back right outside of the line. This would disqualify Ida, and although it was a more dirty tactic to use, Izuku didn't really care, not one bit. It got the point across no matter what. Well, not point, but it accomplished the same purpose in the end. That's basically what I'm trying to say. It would mean that Izuku won, and although it was pretty anticlimactic in how Izuku won, it was still a win nonetheless. Izuku's next match would have been Bakugo. Izuku would immediately frighten Bakugo by using the force in order to suffocate Bakugo for a little bit until he actually blacked out. This would have been Izuku's win, and Izuku would have managed to win pretty much all of the sports festival, each and every part of it. Many heroes would be clamoring around in order to have Izuku intern with them, but Izuku would turn most of them down because of the fact that he was going to intern with the famous man himself, Endeavor. And yeah, that's basically where I'm going to be ending this video, guys. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you guys been rocking with my content for a while now, hey, maybe leave a comment and subscribe. It's your boy King Titan signing out, and the main reason why it took me this long to make an upload in the first place is because I'm working with a new software editor, or I'm working with a new editing program, because I done goofed with Vegas Pro 18, and I've been trying to basically find a different editing platform to use for a good couple of days now. But I think I'm actually going to be enjoying this one, DaVinci Resolve. And yeah, peace.